Welcome to Modern CrimeScope, uncovering real-life crimes, shocking mysteries, and the dark truths behind today's headlines. When Emily and her mother, Laura, lured their longtime rival to the cliffs outside Willow Creek, no one could have imagined how quickly a quiet rivalry would turn deadly. In a single moment of rage and desperation, their lives, and the life of their victim, changed forever. In the heart of Alabama, Willow Creek seemed like a town frozen in time. Its streets were narrow and lined with tall oak trees, their branches stretching overhead like protective arms. Small wooden houses with white picket fences dotted the landscape, each with neatly trimmed lawns and porches that creaked under the weight of old rocking chairs. The town's rhythm was slow and predictable. Morning brought the scent of fresh bread from the bakery, and evenings were filled with the soft hum of cicadas as neighbors waved to one another from across the street. Children played hopscotch and marbles in the dusty lanes, their laughter echoing against the backdrop of a calm, golden sun. But beneath the serene surface, a tension had been quietly building, one that no passerby could see. Two families in particular had become locked in a rivalry that had grown sharper with each passing year. On one end of the town lived a mother and her daughter, a family respected for their presence in the community, but known for their controlling and proud nature. Their every action seemed calculated, and the daughter, though young, often mirrored her mother's assertiveness and sharp eye for influence. On the other side lived another mother-daughter duo who kept mostly to themselves. They were quieter, careful not to draw attention, but somehow had become the target of envy, suspicion, and whispered gossip. It began with small slights, a harsh word overheard at the general store, a glance that lingered too long, subtle gestures meant to intimidate or assert superiority. Then rumors began to swirl. Some claimed that land deeds had been tampered with. Others suggested affairs had been quietly conducted behind closed doors, and yet more whispered about favors denied or debts unpaid. In a town where everyone claimed to know everyone, secrets carried weight, and a small spark of resentment could quickly ignite into something much larger. Neighbors noticed the growing coldness between the families. At church, they exchanged curt nods instead of warm greetings. At the local diner, words were clipped, smiles forced. Friends and acquaintances whispered to one another, speculating about the reasons behind the tension. The air in Willow Creek, which had once seemed crisp and clean, now carried a subtle edge of unease, a feeling that something unspeakable was waiting just beneath the surface. Despite the outward appearance of normal life, kids going to school, adults tending to gardens, traffic moving steadily through Main Street, the town felt like a powder keg. People tried to ignore the growing friction, focusing on their own lives, but it was impossible to escape entirely. Every glance, every casual comment could be interpreted as a provocation. The younger daughter in the quiet family felt eyes on her constantly, judging, measuring, waiting for a misstep. The mother, ever vigilant, noticed the sharpness in others' words, the unspoken challenges at community events. By the time the tension reached its peak, the entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Everyone sensed that the calm facade of Willow Creek was fragile, a delicate mask barely concealing the bitterness and envy festering underneath. It was a town that appeared ordinary, but in reality, it was a place where grudges could grow unchecked, where whispers could turn to plans, and where the quietest corners could hide the darkest secrets. The tension between the two families in Willow Creek had been simmering for months, but it finally reached a boiling point one summer evening. The younger daughter and her mother had grown tired of the constant scrutiny and subtle attacks from their rivals. Every encounter felt like a challenge, every whispered rumor another strike against them. Fear and frustration intertwined, clouding their judgment and pushing them toward a dangerous path. What began as an effort to protect themselves slowly morphed into something darker, fueled by anger and a desperate need to reclaim control over their lives. Late at night, when the town had fallen silent, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and distant barking dogs, the mother and daughter met in their small kitchen. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversation careful yet urgent. The mother's eyes were sharp, calculating, while the daughter's hands trembled slightly, betraying the conflict inside her. Together they began to plot, exploring ways to confront their rival once and for all. At first it was just an idea, something to intimidate the other family, to make them back down. But as they spoke, the plan grew bolder, darker. They considered every detail. The cliffs on the outskirts of town had always been dangerous, jagged rocks dropping sharply into the river below. No one ever ventured there alone, and it was secluded enough that a confrontation could occur without witnesses. The mother and daughter scouted the location in the early morning, observing how the wind cut across the ledges, how the shadows stretched as the sun moved. Each day they studied the terrain, calculating the exact spot that would allow them to carry out their plan without detection. They rehearsed in their minds, imagining the steps, the reactions, the escape. The daughter's heart was heavy with fear and guilt. She knew the plan was wrong, knew that crossing this line could ruin everything, but she also felt trapped by her mother's insistence and the pressure of the rivalry. The mother, relentless and unyielding, convinced her daughter that the only way to regain control and end the torment was to act decisively. Each day, their conversations reinforced the inevitability of the act, and the moral boundaries that had once guided them began to blur. Outside, the town went on as if nothing were wrong. Children laughed in the streets, neighbors exchanged polite greetings, and life continued its ordinary rhythm. No one could see the storm brewing in the quiet household on the edge of town, a storm that would soon erupt in tragedy. The cliffs waited silently, jagged and unforgiving, as though they sensed the approaching darkness. In Willow Creek, the residents would soon learn that even the most peaceful places could harbor unimaginable danger, and that the line between fear and action could be crossed in a single, irreversible moment. By the time the fateful day approached, the mother and daughter were no longer merely planning, they were preparing. Every detail had been considered, every risk calculated. The cliffs had been chosen, the moment determined, and the plan set in motion. In their minds, this act would resolve the rivalry and restore order to their lives. What they did not anticipate was how quickly their world would unravel after one tragic, irreversible choice. The day had arrived. The sky above Willow Creek was heavy with gray clouds, casting a dim, uneasy light over the town. A cool wind rustled through the trees, carrying a faint sense of foreboding. The younger daughter and her mother set out with quiet determination, their minds racing as they approached the cliffs. Every step felt heavier than the last, a mix of dread, adrenaline, and anticipation. The cliffs loomed ahead, jagged and steep, their rocky edges sharp and unforgiving. The river below glistened darkly, reflecting the overcast sky, and the sound of rushing water seemed louder than it should have, as if nature itself sensed the tension in the air. They had lured their rival under the pretense of reconciliation, offering a meeting to settle old disputes and ease the mounting tension. The rival, unsuspecting, followed them willingly, believing that peace might finally be possible. Each step toward the cliff felt surreal to the daughter. The plan, which had seemed abstract in her mind, now carried the weight of reality. She could feel her pulse pounding, hear it echo in her ears over the soft whistle of the wind. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but the mother's steady gaze pushed her forward, urging her to keep moving. When they reached the edge, the tension reached a breaking point. The mother's movements were controlled, precise, and chilling in their decisiveness. The daughter's hands shook as she positioned herself nearby, heart hammering against her chest. The rival stood close to the edge, unaware of the danger that had been carefully orchestrated. In a sudden, horrifying moment, the shove came. Time seemed to slow. The rival lost balance, teetering over the jagged rocks. The sound of the fall was almost muted, yet it carried through the daughter's mind in excruciating detail. The rush of air, the sudden absence of support, the impact against the unforgiving stone below. Shock gripped them immediately. The daughter could hardly believe what had happened. Fear, guilt, and disbelief collided, making it impossible to think clearly. The mother, though equally shaken, maintained a cold, urgent presence, urging them to leave before anyone arrived. They fled the cliffs quickly, their minds racing with panic and confusion. Every shadow seemed like a potential witness, every sound a threat. The quiet town around them carried on unaware, oblivious to the crime that had just occurred. Back at their home, the daughter felt a crushing weight settle over her. She couldn't escape the images of the fall, the sound of the impact, or the knowledge that it was their actions that had caused it. Sleep became impossible. Guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, eroding any sense of normalcy. The mother, meanwhile, tried to maintain an air of composure, keeping the town convinced that this was a tragic accident. But even she could not completely suppress the growing anxiety that came from knowing the truth could be uncovered at any moment. The town mourned the loss of the young woman, holding vigils and offering condolences, none suspecting the dark reality behind the tragedy. Life continued outwardly as usual, but for the mother and daughter, each passing day was a battle with their own conscience. The cliffs, jagged and silent, seemed to loom in their minds like a constant reminder of the irreversible act, and the quiet streets of Willow Creek had never felt more oppressive or threatening. Their world had changed forever in one irreversible, devastating moment. After the tragedy at the cliffs, life in Willow Creek returned to a fragile semblance of normalcy, at least on the surface. The town mourned quietly, holding vigils and offering flowers, while neighbors whispered condolences that carried an unspoken curiosity. The daughter and her mother tried to blend back into this routine, but the weight of what they had done pressed on them like a heavy, invisible hand. Each day that passed brought new waves of guilt, fear, and paranoia. The daughter could barely look anyone in the eye without feeling the crushing awareness of her crime. At first, she tried to act as if nothing had changed. She went to the grocery store, walked past neighbors, and attempted to maintain a calm demeanor, but small cracks began to show. Her hands shook when she carried groceries. Her voice wavered even in casual conversation, and at night she would wake in cold sweats, haunted by the image of the fall. The cliffs, once just a distant backdrop to the town, had become a permanent, horrifying fixture in her mind. Every sound outside her window, every distant car or dog bark seemed to echo with the fear that someone might discover the truth. The mother noticed the changes, too. The daughter's nervous glances, her sudden silences, and her jittery movements could not be ignored. Though she tried to maintain control, even the mother could not completely suppress the anxiety gnawing at her own conscience. They had planned everything carefully, yet reality was far harsher than they had imagined. The daughter's growing instability made her increasingly vulnerable, and it only took a few small mistakes to draw attention from the authorities. Investigators had initially accepted the story of an accident, but over time, inconsistencies began to emerge. Footprints near the cliff edge did not match the victim, and small details provided by neighbors contradicted the family's account. Questions arose about who had been present that day and why certain evidence had been overlooked. The daughter's unusual behavior, combined with these small irregularities, drew investigators closer to the truth. The pressure mounted with each passing day, a silent tension that seemed ready to snap. Eventually, the daughter's guilt became unbearable. One night, alone in her room, she recounted the events over and over in her mind. The weight of her actions pressed on her chest, making it impossible to breathe. In a desperate moment, she confessed her role to the authorities, revealing the meticulous planning, the shove at the cliff, and the involvement of her mother. Her voice trembled, but the details were precise, leaving no room for doubt. Soon after, the mother was confronted with the truth, and under the same pressure admitted her part in the crime. The town of Willow Creek was stunned. People who had once assumed they knew their neighbors were forced to confront a reality that seemed impossible. A mother and daughter, whom they had watched grow up in their community, had carried out a calculated, deadly act. The cliffs, once admired for their scenic beauty, were now marked by tragedy. Families whispered of betrayal, envy, and the fragility of trust. The quiet town that had seemed so ordinary was suddenly exposed as a place where hidden resentment and suppressed anger could spiral into devastating violence, leaving scars that would never fully heal. Had spread quickly, and soon the courtroom was packed with townspeople eager to witness the unfolding of a tragedy they had never imagined could happen so close to home. Reporters lined the streets, cameras flashed, and whispers filled every corner of the small town. The mother and daughter sat side by side, faces pale and tense, knowing that their actions had set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone. As the trial progressed, the details of the crime were laid bare. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture of premeditation, describing how the mother and daughter had studied the cliffs, rehearsed their plan, and lured their rival to the edge. Witnesses recounted the subtle signs of tension they had noticed in the weeks leading up to the incident. The town's collective shock deepened as evidence revealed the lengths to which jealousy and envy had driven the family. Even those who had once believed in their innocence were forced to grapple with the horrifying reality of the crime. Inside the courtroom, the mother remained composed, her demeanor cold and calculating, while the daughter struggled visibly with guilt and shame. Every day of the trial forced them to confront the magnitude of their actions, the life they had taken, and the trust they had shattered in the community. The gravity of the crime weighed heavily on them both, and each testimony added layers of remorse, tension, and fear. The cliffs, which had once seemed like a secluded, remote place, were now a symbol of their darkest choices, immortalized in court documents, photographs, and witness accounts. The sentencing was a moment of reckoning. The mother and daughter were both given lengthy prison terms, reflecting the severity of their premeditated actions. The town reacted with a mixture of relief and lingering unease. Justice had been served, yet the wounds ran deep, and the sense of betrayal lingered in the hearts of the residents. Families whispered in hushed tones about trust, morality, and the thin line between ordinary life and unimaginable violence. The tragedy had stripped Willow Creek of its innocence, leaving behind a cautionary tale about envy, anger, and unchecked grudges. In the months and years that followed, Willow Creek struggled to heal. The cliffs, once admired for their scenic beauty and calm solitude, became a haunting reminder of what had transpired. Local children were warned to stay away from the edges, and hikers often paused to reflect on the events that had forever changed the town's identity. Residents who had once taken comfort in the town's quiet, familiar rhythm now approached life with a heightened awareness of human fragility and the unpredictable consequences of emotion unchecked by reason.